Well, right from the get-go, the Rutles, All You Need Is Cash, the story of the Prefab Four, was a complete joy, I think, for everyone who worked on it. It was so close, in fact, to the demise of the Beatles. And I think someone in America was offering the lads $20 million each to get together for 20 minutes. And they were running gags with it on Saturday Night Live on NBC. Clearly it was getting silly and something sillier had to be done. And so that's how the film came about. I was surprised, I didn't think I was, like the John Lennon character. But in fact, it was, I seemed to slip into it rather easily because I suppose deep down I have got an angry side, and it was really nice to sort of, slip into that. All the names came from Eric Idle because, it was Eric's idea to sort of do the Rutles, as it were. I hated the name Rutles. I thought, I'm such a pedant, I said it should have two T's, otherwise they're going to call it Rutles. So why don't you call it the Bootles? At least that's in Liverpool. And it's very close to bootleg, but no, Eric came up with the names, and it was my job. It happened so quickly. My job to just write the songs. I remember sitting in Lord Michael's office in New York, and they were saying, after we showed the clip from Rutland Weekend Television of the original spoof of A Hard Day's Night, with black and white, speeded up, running about, pointy shoes, tight trousers, and funny hair. It was mailbag. The mail just came in saying, we love the Rutles. There were even Beatles albums with Beatles crossed out and Rutles written on it. And Lorne said, we've got to do something about this. And he went downstairs and got the budget to do the whole movie. So I can remember sitting in the office in New York, and suddenly everyone looked at me and said, do you reckon you can write 20 more Rutles songs by next Thursday lunchtime? And I went, I'll try, The UK shoot was several weeks, and then there was more shooting in New York, and even expensively in Louisiana, New Orleans. But I remember that I had about 3 months to write the songs, and I knew I'd be sunk if I started listening to Beatles songs. And so I started writing from memory of where I was when certain songs came out, because I was never I always liked their music and things like that, but I was at art school when kind of Love Me Do and things like that came out, and I was more interested in what I was doing. The Beatles song that really made me sit up and listen was in fact Penny Lane, because I thought the lyrics were so good, the orchestration was so good, and I thought this is taking popular music onto a totally different level. So the hardest ones for me to write were the sort of like the early sort of like hold my hand kind of things. And I sort of had to remember my days at a co-ed school, looking at girls with kittens up their jumpers, And but it was a lot easier to sort of write funny lyrics, on the more psychedelic things like, Piggy in the Middle. But anyway, that took 3 months, and I had, a couple of good ideas. That first one was don't listen to any Beatles songs, and if I could play the song on a guitar or just on the piano, I knew the song worked. So the second sort of good idea was to sort of get the boys together, which was Ricky Fattar, who used to play drums with the Beach Boys, and John Halsey on the drums, Ollie Halsall, who used to be in John Halsey's band Pato. He's the most extraordinary guitarist and great voice. So the four of us were shacked up in this house in North London, in Hendon, during Wimbledon fortnight, and with a bloke called Alistair and two-track Revoxes, and we just rehearsed and we recorded what we were doing so we could sort of see if we were close or not, and we just sort of knitted together as a group, and after 2 weeks of this rehearsal, if we got tired, we'd stop and watch Wimbledon, and then by the time we went to the studio, we felt like a band had been on the road, and the whole album took 10 days. Sounds like the script, it took 10 days to make, including mixing and orchestration and everything else. Didn't really. We just sort of, it was so, just get on with it and do it, and if everything wasn't quite right, we said, it doesn't matter, it's the Rutles. Who are the Beatles? They don't exist. We sort of played that game. But when we'd finished it, we thought, hang on, it's still sounding a bit good, because it was on 24 track, and Steve James, the fantastic engineer, had been recording it at 30 inches per second, which is really hi-fi, and in analog days, that's what was the best you could do. 2-inch tape whizzing through at 30 inches a second, and it was still sounding too good, so we put it through a kind of compressor. We thought, that sounded more like it. Then we put the compressed thing through the compressor again, and then it started to sound like coming off 4 tracks, like Sergeant Pepper had done, I didn't actually study any footage of John. The thing is, I remember, when they did All You Need Is Love, I remember him chewing gum, so I chewed gum doing that. And I thought, no, the best thing to be is just sort of almost myself, but just put the accent on, And a lot of it was ad-libbed, and I didn't even think about it. There's that bit when I'm sort of lying on a couch, I'd like to own a squadron of tanks. That just popped into my head, And the other thing, like with being in the bath with Chastity, Eric sort of read the question out, we didn't know. They turned the water on, turned the camera over. I didn't know what was coming, And he said, why are you in a bath getting wet? So, well, we're in a bath getting wet because basically Chastity and myself, we talked it over, we think that that civilization is basically an effective sewage system, and we hope by the use of plumbing to demonstrate this to the world. And it's terrible because Gwen Taylor, who's playing Chastity, she's also Leggy's mum. She's brilliant. She was very much a key part of Rutland Weekend Television. Gwen Taylor. She was. I could feel her going, sort of nodding, But I nearly got the giggles as well but it was like that. It's next. We get that. We've got that. And Gary Weiss, shot it all from the hip. 16mm camera, and he's a genius. For being picky in the labs, making sure what he'd shot matched the stuff that we got from Apple. Well, I don't know what he thought of the film, but we certainly sent him the album, and he came back very positive with a note sort of saying, "Well, watch out for cheese and onions. Watch out for Get Up and Go." He said the people who own Northern Songs, ATV Music at that time, he said you might have trouble with them. So if I were you, I'd leave it off. And I remember we were watching the Rushes. And George was there, and it was with A Girl Like You. And he turned around and he said to me, "That one's a bit close, I said, "Yeah, it's close, but it's not the same, is it?" He said, "No, I know it's not the same, but you can always stand up in court with your guitar," like he had to do with He's So Fine. And in fact, when ATV came after me, my publishers got a musicologist to answer all the charges, sort of like, and put down the top lines and the chords and the words, and just one after another. One particular song, I think it was Hold My Hand, they said it was like 12 other Beatles songs, including Twist and Shout, which wasn't actually written by the Beatles. So, they were, desperately, one of the twin pillars of global economics, the greed side. The other side is fear. But, they were definitely sort of trying to sort of get as much as they can out of everything, So, we knew, what else are you trying to do? You were trying to do Beatley kind of things, But they say, aha, you're copying the Beatles. Well, hang on, what about all the other people who copied the Beatles when they came out? There's just about every band in Liverpool with an accent was signed up. And everyone copied the Beatles, and we were doing it for the real reason, And so they come after you, and which is very unsporting, I think, and pusillanimous, to say the least. When ATV Music, decided to throw the book at me, we had got this musicologist report saying no case to answer, And in one case, he halfway through began to sort of have a sense of humour about it and suggested that, oh yeah, and all right, we're in the public domain, But anyway, basically, it cost me $5,500. Right? Publishers didn't actually pay for it, but they said there's no case to answer, and they said, but we won't go to court because we might not get costs. Of course you didn't do it. Of course we'll win, but we might not get costs. So the upshot was ATV Music took copyright and they offered me 10%, and I flatly refused to sign that. And then they offered me 50%, but they had the copyright. And so basically those first 14 songs that were on the vinyl album are still copyright ATV Music. And all of those songs are somewhere in the ethos of the machine as either Lennon-McCartney Innes or Innes-McCartney Lennon, and also there's a clause in there saying if anyone ever does those songs, I am not to be publicly credited with writing them. And so I've actually sort of sent messages back to Paul saying, how do you feel about that? Somebody does Cheese and Onions, they're going to say you and John wrote it. I mean, you cannot invent this stuff. I mean, I look around the world today, and I think, how on earth did Kafka know how stupid it could get? It's so like his books, what is actually happening. But anyway, as after all the dust is settled, the rest of the Rutles stuff is mine. They didn't count the other 6 tracks that were in the film. Then the second album, Archaeology, which was more of a kind of my way of an homage, if you like, and a bit of fun, because I wasn't sure about doing that. But there's one particular song called Questionnaire on that album, and it's sort of the last verse says, tell me what you think about how easy it can be to buy a gun. Do you think it's crazy, half crazy, or not crazy at all? Put a tick in the appropriate box. And I went down to see George playing him the songs, and he sort of listened to about 3 or 4, and he went, hang on, these are your songs. Don't be shy, because they weren't particularly like any other Beatles songs. But the thing is, you can take any song and sing it in Rutles, which I call the sort of fake Liverpool accent, and do kind of, George Martin kind of production gags on it, and you've got a Rutle album, you've got a Beatlesque song. My overview is that the Rutles, the word Rutle should actually be a verb. It should be in the dictionary, to Rutle, verb transitive or whatever. To copy or emulate someone you admire, brackets, especially in the music business. And because the Beatles were Rutles, they Rutled Eddie Cochran and Gene Vincent, and Mozart was probably a Rutle. Anyone's heard music think, I want to do that, is Rutling. And even if it isn't music, children Rutle their parents or their favourite uncle. We're a breed, a species of copycats.
So Oasis are the Rutles as well?
Yeah, they are.
I'm just going to